Testando. Sejam todos bem-vindos ao nosso seminário Olhar Artificial, a IA como instrumento e como autora. Esse seminário foi organizado pelos alunos de Multimeio na disciplina Diálogos Internacionais e ele se focará nas seguintes questões da IA no cenário artístico atual e suas problemáticas, como a arte de IA afeta a linguagem visual e escrita, e como manter a ética da autoria no treinamento de IAs atualmente. Hoje começaremos a nossa série de palestras com professores internacionais sobre o tema da inteligência artificial. E nosso primeiro convidado será o professor Brett Stahlbaum, com a mediação do professor Marcos Bastos, que em seguida também auxiliará no debate, nas perguntas e respostas. Logo em seguida, a convidada é a professora Heidi Boisvert, mediada pelo professor Claudir Segura. E o terceiro convidado é a professora Dora Kaufmann. Por último, nós finalizaremos o evento com uma mesa de discussões com a professora Terra Friedrich Budini e nas questões sobre relações institucionais e internacionais. Agora, irei ler o currículo deles para a apresentação. Brett Stahlbaum possui mestrado em Artes Plásticas pelo Laboratório de Mídia Digital CADRE de São José State University e bacharelado em Estudos de Cinema pela São Francisco State University. Ele lecionou arte na São José State University e Computadores e Tecnologia da Informação no Evergreen Valley College, onde se especializou no ensino de linguagens de programação por meio de educação à distância baseada na web. Atualmente é professor em tempo integral e coordenador do curso interdisciplinar de computação nas artes ICANN da UCSD. O mediador professor Marcos Bastos é doutor em comunicação e semiótica pela PUC-SP, onde é professor vinculado ao Departamento de Artes desde 2003 e ao programa de pós-graduação em Tecnologias, Inteligência e Design Digital desde 2012. Tem experiência docente nas graduações em Comunicação e Multimeios, Arte, História, Crítica e Curadoria, Jornalismo, Publicidade e Propaganda, Tecnologia e Mídias Digitais e na pós-graduação em Tecnologias da Inteligência e Design Digital. É autor de 15 artigos em periódicos e 21 capítulos de livros. Heidi Boisvert é uma artista interdisciplinar, designer de experiência, tecnologia criativa e pesquisadora acadêmica que interroga os efeitos neurobiológicos e socioculturais da mídia e da tecnologia. Simplificando, ela estuda o papel do corpo, dos sentidos e da emoção na percepção humana e na mudança social. Ela fundou e atua como diretora criativa do Future Perfect Lab, um grupo de reflexão que aproveita o poder da cultura pop, da tecnologia emergente e da neurociência para desencadear mudanças sociais. Atualmente, ela é professora assistente de IA e artes com foco em tecnologia de desempenho imersivo na Faculdade de Artes, Escola de Teatro e Dança da Universidade da Flórida. O mediador é o professor Claudir Segura, doutor em processos cognitivos e ambientes digitais, mestre em design pela Faculdade de Arquitetura e Urbanismo da Universidade de São Paulo e tem pós-graduado e graduado em marketing pela Escola Superior de Propaganda e Marketing. Atualmente é professor na PUC-SP e Centro Universitário Belas Artes. Ele faz parte do Adobe Education Leader da América Latina, o Adobe Education Trainer no Brasil, com atuação no ensino de ferramentas tecnológicas voltadas à área da comunicação, design e internet. O terceiro convidado é a professora Dora Kaufmann. Ela é pesquisadora dos impactos sociais da inteligência artificial, atuando nos Institutos de Estudos Avançados e do Centro de Pesquisa em Redes Digitais Atopos na Escola de Comunicação e Artes, ambos da Universidade de São Paulo. Também é pós-doutoranda em filosofia no programa de pós-graduação em Tecnologias e da Inteligência e Design Digital na PUC-SP. Por 35 anos, foi executiva sênior em áreas de banco de investimentos e sócia-gestora de agências de marketing e comunicação. Como autora, publicou os livros Empresas e Consumidores em Rede, um estudo das práticas colaborativas no Brasil, O Despertar de Gulliver, os desafios das empresas nas redes digitais e A Inteligência Artificial irá suplantar a inteligência humana? Por fim, temos a professora Terra Friedrich Budini, professora e coordenadora do mestrado profissional em Governança Global e Formulação de Políticas Internacionais da PUC-SP. Vice-líder do Núcleo de Estudos em Relações Internacionais da PUC e também foi coordenadora do curso de Relações Internacionais da PUC-SP entre 2017 e 2021. Ela é doutora em Ciência Política pela Universidade de São Paulo e mestre em Relações Internacionais pelo Programa de Pós-Graduação da Unesp, Unicamp, PUC-SP e Santiago Dantas. Em suas atividades de pesquisa e ensino, atua nos seguintes temas: sociedade civil, corporações transnacionais e conflitos socioambientais, também nas instituições internacionais e governança global. Agora nós vamos iniciar a nossa conversa, nosso seminário com o Brett e vamos chamar ele aqui na plataforma. Hi, Brett. Welcome and good morning. We are honored to have you here in our seminar. Feel free to start your presentation. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you very well, and it's nice to be here. Good morning, everybody.
Perfect. So feel free to start.
Great. Hi, Johnny. Good to see you.
Recording is on.
Hi, by the way, I'm going to be translating while you talk. So if you could please take some pauses, I'm going to translate and then we can keep going. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll do the best I can. Let me try this.
I guess you. Hey, Brett. You just your
Hi.
screen is being shared with us right now. Just.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Then we're all ready to go.
Será que ele sabe que é pra começar?
Hum,
É 10h30, né? Tranquilo. Eu? Não, é que eu tenho uma reunião às 2. Aí quando me convidaram pra tarde eu falei que não podia. Mas por vocês eu faço tudo que vocês pedirem. A não ser que eu não possa, né?
Ele tava tentando compartilhar a tela. Eu avisei que deu certo.
So, did you manage to share the screen and everything? If you want to start, we're ready. So. Yeah, you're sharing. We can see it.
very good.
estamos no horário. Se não começar agora. Hi, Brett. So it's 10:30. Everybody's here. The mediator, Marcos Bastos, is here with us, and we are already broadcasting. So start whenever you feel like it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I want to thank everybody on your committee. I want to thank Professor De Almeida and everybody else at Pookie. It's always great to visit with Pookie. I've been at your campus a number of times and presented there a number of times in different capacities, and always a pleasure to come back and be with you and spend a little bit of time with you. I always appreciate the opportunity, so thank you for having me. So, I was, you know, invited to think a little bit about your theme, which is about the AI gaze. And the first thing that I wanted to say in the context of all of this is, well, at least to clarify what my expertise in this field is, because I'm only a kind of minor AI practitioner. I'm a computer artist, Master of Fine Arts degree. My position here at UCSD is a teaching position. I coordinate a major called Interdisciplinary Computing in the Arts, which is a very exciting major at the University of California, San Diego. So the largest major in the School of Arts and Humanities. It's students that are artists in an art department, but they're working primarily with computer science ideas and also developing a fluency in cultural ideas from art, relating them to computer science ideas, and using computer science as the primary media of their expression. So what we teach here in ICAM ranges from microcontrollers and electricity and electronics, which is part of my teaching. In other words, little tiny computers that I'll mention briefly in the example that I present today, but also all the way up to supercomputing. One of the other things that I teach is building computation clusters that are a little bit more related to supercomputing concepts, and things like tile displays like you see behind me, for doing data visualization and things like that. So, what my teaching particularly engages with is, on one hand, computers without screens, microcontrollers, and controlling robotics and LEDs, and histories of kinetic sculpture and radio. On the other hand, like building supercomputers, and we do everything in between in this major as well. So
Sorry,
that's my expertise. And then,
I'm just going to
is there
translate. Yeah. Hi.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm the translator.
Slow down.
Yeah, it's cool. Ele tá
Okay,
basicamente, ele
so
tá explicando que ele dá aula na Universidade de UCLA, né? E ele fala isso, obrigada. Ele tá explicando que ele não é um esperto necessariamente em AI, mas que ele tem uma posição mais de professor. Então ele falou que ele trabalha bastante com artes, e ele dá aula no departamento de artes. E ele lida com esses conceitos de ciência da computação como um meio. Mas o foco é nos artistas e em desenvolver arte que dialogue com a tecnologia. Ele explicou que ele também vai trazer na apresentação dele um pouco isso dos mini-computadores, mas que ele lida até com supercomputadores, inclusive o que ele tem atrás dele, que é um tile display, que é para computadores grandes e visualização de dados. Então, ele lida bastante com essa área. Ele está explicando do porquê que o foco dele não é necessariamente em inteligência artificial.
So my first apologies to the translator for racing ahead. My bad. So anyway, what I so I'm teaching faculty, and I teach a lot of things related to microcontrollers, and this is what I'm going to present to you today is an example from the world of training artificial neural networks and then translating that into models that can run on microcontrollers. But there's a bigger point involved that I want to make. I'll pause for translate.
Obrigada. Ele está falando que ele vai lidar bastante também com esse tópico que ele tinha mencionado dos microcontroladores e como é que o treinamento de inteligência artificial pode interagir com esses microcontroladores e o mundo físico dos eletrônicos.
So I do have a background in collaboration with other artists, and I have done AI projects in the past, just with different generations of artificial intelligence. I won't play this video, but it's about a project. You can look it up if you wish. It's not critical to what I'm going to talk about today, but this is an older project, like 16, 17 years ago. That's an artificial intelligence project called the Silver Island Bunker Trail, where we were using, this is a project I did with an artist who I'm also married to, Paula Poole, where we were using artificial intelligence techniques to discover hiking trails. It was related to something called locative media, and we were using AI to find trails that we would actually then go follow the AI through the landscape. See if I can jump ahead to a point in the video. There's Paula. Let's see. So, artificially derived trails that found their way through the contour map of a landscape was some of this earlier AI work to do. So I'll stop for translation.
Ele está falando que ele já trabalhou com AI antes, uns 16, 17 anos atrás, era outra geração de inteligência artificial, e ele fez esse projeto que é Silver Island Bunker Trail, que ele usou a inteligência artificial para achar trilhas de caminhada ao redor de um mapa. Então, ele pegava o mapa e fazia inteligência artificial para conseguir traçar essas trilhas.
So, my teaching experience also includes teaching histories of artists who were working with artificial intelligence. And I'm just going to throw some names out there and some of the previous techniques. But what I really want to emphasize here, particularly for purposes of translation, is that we are in a particular AI moment where neural network style artificial intelligence, which includes things like convolutional networks, deep learning is the sort of more generic term. You hear about things like large language models and generative adversarial networks. They're based on a particular style of, and very, very successful style of artificial intelligence that has of course become very, very well known in recent years, and which artists are beginning to explore in really interesting ways. And that's a little bit what I'm about to do, is to sort of explain what those styles, the newer styles of AI are, and put them in a little bit of a historical context. I'll pause for translation there.
Ele está explicando que ele vai focar mais na história dos estilos diferentes de inteligência artificial, que a gente está num momento específico da história da inteligência artificial em que surge esse estilo de deep learning, de modelos de linguagem, que é tipo AI generativo. Tudo isso é um momento, mas ele vai explicar um pouco uma perspectiva mais histórica da inteligência artificial.
And I want some of the artists that we teach when we cover the histories of this are artists like Mark Bolan, Michael Mateus, who's at University of California, Santa Cruz, David Rokeby, George LaGrady, Maria Verstrappen, and Erwin Driesens, who are some artists I really, really like. Legends of like artificial life projects like Christina Sommerer and Laurette Montagu are all super interesting artists. And they, some of the previous sort of styles of AI or artificial intelligence techniques around which there have been other waves of creative interest in art making include expert systems, cellular genetic algorithms, gaming AI, a whole bunch of different artificial intelligence techniques from the past around which there's been really significant and interesting work. So there's a past behind us that I want to point out, and then a future in front of us. And so I want to talk today a little bit about some of the practitioners here in ICAM and at UCSD who are making art with these more contemporary techniques.
Ele mencionou o nome de alguns
I'm
artistas.
pausing for translation.
Thank you. Ele mencionou o nome de alguns artistas e ele também falou que ele quer fazer essa dinâmica de falar do passado da inteligência artificial e falar um pouco do futuro da inteligência artificial, partindo desse ponto de que esses estilos e esses modos de pensar sobre e de usar a inteligência artificial, de construir essas inteligências, muda. Então, ele mencionou também que antes se utilizava bastante inteligência artificial em jogos, que tinha sistemas de pensamento diferentes, e que agora a gente está vendo bastante essa coisa da inteligência artificial generativa e tudo isso.
So this is from Google Colab, and this is a Jupyter notebook. So one of the things that I teach is computer programming in the arts. And I'm hearing a little bit of feedback there, but okay, so what I wanted to do is just kind of show you this very, very simple AI training example, and then talk about its output a little bit, because there's something very, very interesting and important about if we're going to examine the artificial gaze, we need to understand some of the ways that artificial gaze is being created. This is, by the way, not exclusive. There are many, many techniques in computer vision, but this is kind of these kinds of networks, sort of training neural networks, is the main way that that field has been really, really pushed forward in terms of computer vision. So this is an example that actually has to do with teaching microcontrollers. And I'm going to avoid the unimportant details like, the specifics of Python programming, but I do want to talk about some of the sections of this notebook because they describe how neural networks are trained. So I'll pause for translation there.
Ele está falando que ele vai abrir agora uma página do Colab do Google. E isso daí que ele está mostrando é um negócio que se chama Jupyter Notebook, que é tipo um caderno de Júpiter. Que o que ele está mostrando aqui é um exemplo de treinamento de AI. E ele espera que, com esse exemplo, a gente consiga entender como é que esse olhar é criado, né, da inteligência artificial. Ele fala que hoje a gente tem muito esse treinamento em networks neurais, assim, que é um tipo de pensamento sobre inteligência artificial. E ele está dando esse exemplo que é específico sobre como ensinar a usar microcontroladores, mas que ele acha que isso dialoga com uma discussão maior sobre como é que a gente treina mesmo essas inteligências artificiais.
So neural networks learn from existing data. And what is presented in this teaching example is not a very practical real-world example, but it does tell us how the process works. So what happens in this example is, in fact, we're just working with the sign function. Now, the sign function is something that, for you programmers, is in every math library and every programming language. So this is also a little bit of an absurd example, but very, very useful for teaching. The bigger picture here is that we're using the sign function here in Python, actually, right here, to create a data set. And what it is, it's a set of inputs and outputs. So we have an input number that's randomly generated, and we have an output that is a calculation from Python of the exact sign value associated with that input value. So in other words, a very, very simple function. We have a number that goes into the function, And then we have the representative sign value that comes out of it. And we simply create a training set out of all of, actually 1,000 of these values. We're creating right here 1,000 samples, and we end up using the matplot library to simply plot this output right here. And what we see is, with random numbers being generated on the input and with the output of the sign, we get this, classical even sine wave. The point is we have 1,000 inputs and outputs that are represented in this image. Pausing for translation.
Ele está explicando uma coisa matemática, que isso é linguagem de computação, e ele está falando que, para treinar essa neural network, eles pegam dados que já existem, e, nesse exemplo, ele está usando uma função de sim. Então, ele pega essa função e ele usa para criar um monte de dados. E esses dados são input e output. Então, tudo que entra e tudo que sai. E isso tem que dar o valor dessa função aí. Dentro disso, com todos esses números, ele consegue fazer um kit de treinamento para a inteligência artificial. Então, você tem um monte de número sendo gerado, e aí ele vai pegar esses números e vai colocar dentro desse modelo.
And again, I really want to emphasize that this is a teaching example. So what we would do in the real world is we would take data that we're looking for some, result from, but that we don't know how to write the function. We're simply using the sign function here to create training data, and kind of absurdly, we're training a neural network to do some work that we already know how to do in a much easier way. If you could translate that, that'd be great.
Ele está explicando também que esse é um exemplo de aula, que no mundo real é diferente, porque você não saberia fazer esse cálculo. Nesse caso, ele tem os números e ele sabe como usar, porque ele já tem essa função, mas no mundo real você não teria essa função. Então, o trabalho da inteligência artificial é mais incorporado, né? Porque você não conseguiria fazer sozinho.
So, to make it more like a real-world example, we actually muddy our test data a little bit. We alter it a little bit to add some randomness to it, which is represented in this chart, just to make it more like real-world data rather than the exact output of the sign function. Translate, please.
E aí ele falou que, para parecer mais um exemplo real, eles colocam vários dados que não necessariamente que não são reais, eles não vêm dessa conta matemática, mas eles dão esse barulho, esse ruído que é mais realista.
So the process then is we take that data and we train a network with that data. And I'm not going to go into we don't have time to do much detail at all here, but I'm just going to say that in this example, they're training a very small network with that data. And the idea is that very, very small network learns how to do the sign function by being fed that data, comparing it to output data, and adjusting some internal weights and biases. Translate, please.
Ele explicou que, nesse caso, eles pegam todos esses dados, eles treinam essa network. Nesse exemplo, ela é pequenininha, mas ela aprende a fazer essa função. E ela pode fazer essa função depois, em outros casos.
And then we have a small network that has learned how to do this, right? We give it input values and we have output values, and we have the comparison of the original input data which is blue, with the predictions that are made by that neural network. And this was a very small network, so the important point here is that it did not work. You can see that the data of the neural network, what it learned, was very, very different from the input data. If you could translate, please.
Ele está explicando que, nesse caso, esse AI ele você consegue ver aqui que o vermelho são os dados que a inteligência artificial criou e o azul são os dados que eles realmente tinham, os valores reais. E ele estava explicando que o importante de tirar é que esse pequeno AI não conseguiu os dados corretos. Ele conseguiu copiar, mas ele não conseguiu realmente os valores que eles tinham.
So what we do is we start over with a larger model. You know, this is a very, very
Opa.
we change the model, we make a larger model, and we train that model with the same data. And you know, here's some statistics about it, but you see that by changing basically the number of parameters in our model, right, we end up with you know, predicted data that fits the input data better. In other words, we had to increase the size of our network in order to get a network model that has learned how to do the sign function. Translate, please.
Ele explicou que então eles tiveram que começar tudo de novo e eles fizeram um network que é maior e ele tem maior número de parâmetros. Então, com esse network que é maior, eles conseguem fazer mais coisas e eles chegam num resultado que é mais próximo do resultado que eles queriam, no resultado correto.
And so that's what we're really talking about when we talk about the kind of AI. This is a very simple example that explains the kind of AIs that exist today. What they really are is they're a thing called a function approximator. Now, the model that we are using here, you know, has a very, very small number of parameters. I'm going to skip ahead for a second, all the way down to the part of the program that really shows what the AI is. We have here a big list of numbers. This has been converted into a model called TensorFlow Lite from TensorFlow that's made to run on microcontrollers. Don't worry about that so much. The key thing here that I want to observe is that the knowledge to approximate the sign function is represented in this long list of numbers. In some way or another, this long list of numbers, we can say now, knows how to approximate the calculation of the sign function. You could translate, please.
Ele está explicando que o que realmente a inteligência artificial é que ela consegue aproximar funções, são funções matemáticas. E ele está mostrando essa lista bem grande de números e explicando que o conhecimento para conseguir fazer essas funções está dentro desses números.
And again, this is a little bit silly, right? It's silly because we have a much more practical way to calculate the sign function. Again, this is just a very easy teaching example to understand what these networks do. So the next thing I want to show you is I want to go back in the program just a little bit to where we started and let's see if I can find the lines here. Right here, one of the things is that when we're creating this random list of inputs and outputs that are the result of the sign function, we also shuffle them. We change their order a little bit. Now, the way I'm going to start this running, but I'm not going to continue to run it. I'll show you how to run the program. We can go run all. And in Jupyter Notebook, and this is Jupyter Notebook at Google, what it does is it runs this code and then it shows us the output. So this program, you know, takes a little bit of time to run. If I get down here, you can see it's doing this business right now of running the first epochs. Eventually, it'll produce the output down here that we were just looking at, which is a data structure that can be put in a microcontroller, which represents the parameters of the output and the knowledge of how to do that. So translate, please. And then
Ele está explicando que nesse caso é meio bobo, porque é um exemplo para aprender mesmo como funciona, porque a gente sabe fazer uma função dessas. Só que ele falou que uma coisa interessante que eles fizeram é que eles pegaram essa lista de números e eles embaralharam esses números E ele falou que agora ele pediu para o Jupyter Notebook, que é essa página do Google, fazer esse código. E aí ele está gerando o código para visualização.
So it's the same data, it's the same kind of data every time we train it, but it's in a different order and it's different random numbers every time we train it. And so when we get to the output, the parameters of this model, one of the things is we'll notice that early in these two files compared side by side, it has some metadata at the top of the file, but starting right about on line 5 here, you'll see that the numbers are different. Our first number is hexadecimal 98, then 000, C8, 00, and we have completely different numbers like 88, 000, 0, or E0, 0. All of these numbers are different in both models, but both of these models know how to do the same thing. Moment for translation, please.
Ele está explicando que eles sempre usam o mesmo tipo de dado para fazer esse treinamento, só que a ordem é diferente e são diferentes números. E ele está explicando que, mesmo usando o mesmo tipo de treinamento, esses modelos vão ter de resultados diferentes, por mais que eles tenham sido treinados para fazer a mesma coisa e eles consigam fazer a mesma coisa.
And the important point here is that we absolutely do not know how this works. The kinds of neural network programming that we do today is a great triumph of applied mathematics, but we don't really know why it is that either of these sets of numbers, we don't know how it is that these sets of numbers have learned how to do anything, even something simple like the sine function. Moment for translation.
Ele falou que é um grande triunfo das matemáticas aplicadas, que a gente consegue fazer isso, mas que a gente ainda não sabe como isso funciona. Por que ou como esses sets que ele deu, essas duas visualizações, são diferentes. Como é que isso tem uma criação diferente.
And thus, I argue that's something that's very, very important about the kinds of artificial intelligences that we use today. If we're going to talk about some notion of the AI gaze, we need to understand that we know how to create them, right? But we don't know how they work. We don't know how the AI gaze does what the AI gaze does.
Que quando a gente vai falar do olhar artificial, a gente sabe como a gente consegue criar um olhar artificial, mas a gente não sabe como é que a inteligência artificial consegue chegar nesse ponto, como é que é o trabalho interno assim dessa criação.
And so the question is, well, what do we do about that? And that's where I want to return and talk about ICAM and UCSD a little bit, because we are a place where some of the artists who have been asking this question of does this kind of AI mean, and how do we use it? And even what does the AI gaze mean, and what does it do? Are things that have to be explored. And here at UCSD, it's a great place to study this, both because UCSD has an important role in the invention of these kinds of neural network models, particularly via our cognitive science department, but also because we have some really interesting artists and practitioners here and researchers here who are, pushing this question forward in the field of art. Moment for translation.
E ele falou, bom, então a grande pergunta é o que a gente faz com isso, né? E ele está falando que nesse ICAM e no UCSD, que são os lugares onde ele estuda, trabalha, os artistas exploram bastante essas questões e, principalmente no departamento de ciência cognitiva, eles tentam entender realmente essa pergunta, o que você faz com essa inteligência artificial e como chegar nessas respostas.
And so naturally, we have very little time left today, So I'm going to quickly go through the work of some of my colleagues here at UC San Diego who are doing really interesting, research and are just really, really interesting, fascinating artists who are carrying, moving this ball forward by asking the question of how is it that we, live and work with these kinds of AIs. A moment for translation, please.
Ele está falando que a gente tem pouco tempo, então ele vai passar um pouco o trabalho dos colegas dele que trabalham no USCD. E é isso, ele vai passar o trabalho dos amiguinhos.
One of the earliest, younger generation of AI artists to begin working through these kinds of models is Memo Acton, Professor Memo Acton, who teaches in our department. And this is one of the earlier works, a series that began in 2017, and it's called Learning to See, the Learning to See series. I'm just going to show a little bit of one video here. I'm going to go ahead and turn the volume down because we don't necessarily need to see the music or hear the music in this case, but to go ahead and just look at the visuals in this case. On the left is real video of a performer manipulating some objects, and they're being translated through a neural network on the right that's been trained to see the world as seascapes or oceanscapes. So let's take a look at this. It's really impressively beautiful piece. Let's watch it for just a moment. So you see sort of a blanket on the left, and you see how the AI and a towel, and how the AI is interpreting what it's seeing as a seascape. It's learned to see the sea, so it sees everything as an oceanscape.
Traduz. Agora traduz. Explicar? Só para explicar um pouco, ele está falando que ele está mostrando o trabalho de um colega, de 2017, que se chama Learning to See, e aí, de um lado, a gente tem o vídeo real, que é essa toalha, e do outro lado você tem uma inteligência artificial que aprendeu a ver oceanos. Então, ela vê tudo como oceanos. Ela interpreta todas as imagens dentro desse modelo que ela aprendeu, que é de oceanos. Então, você consegue ver que ela acaba transformando o que ela vê em um oceano.
And I want to acknowledge this more recent work that is, received a lot of really positive attention, including being included in this year's Venice Biennale 2024. Professor Acton has, an installation that's set up in a church space. Absolutely beautiful. I'll just play just a tiny bit of this, so you can get a sense of his aesthetic and his work. Okay, and again, using AI techniques, in this interesting way, and as an artist working through what they might mean, many of Acton's works end up, addressing the mysteries of AI and sort of in a very, very clever way, relating them to theological mysteries in his work. The questioning of what it means to be, ontological questions of, how we see and how AI sees, and this is a consistent theme throughout his work, and it's very, 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 very successful in the art world.
Ele passou o trabalho também que foi para Veneza, do Memo Acton, que é o colega dele, Bienal de Veneza de 2024, e ele fala que a técnica de inteligência artificial que o Memo utiliza tem muito a ver com os mistérios da inteligência artificial, e ele conecta isso com os mistérios no sentido ontológico, questões ontológicas e questões teológicas. Então, o que significa ver, o que significa ser visto? Ele lida bastante com essas questões.
And I know technically we're out of time, but just if you will indulge me, just very briefly, I'll talk about two more colleagues and researchers here at UC San Diego. who are working with AI. This is a really amazing piece by Professor Amy Alexander, who as an artist has been one of the artists who's kind of consistently on the edge of exploring emerging technologies and asking the question of, what do they mean for the arts, and how are we going to use these things as an artist? This is called What the Robot Saw. And it's a very complex piece. I'm not going to pretend to, be able to summarize this in great detail, other than it's a live movie, a generative movie. So it has no beginning and no end. It's constantly being generated. So here's the Twitch screen of the live film. And what it does is she's scraping YouTube for unpopular videos that don't have a strong following. And she's using some artificial intelligence, computer vision techniques to create a live, constant, ongoing edit of these videos. It also looks for talking heads and people speaking. And again, I have the audio down on this. It also has audio, so I can't do it justice really here in a short viewing, given that we have limited time for sharing. But one of the AI techniques that does get included in here is classification, and in particular a Google API that does face classification. This is something that is folded into her editing of this constant live AI edited video looking at unpopular YouTube videos. And one of her particular interests and way of raising the question of how it is we're going to be with these AIs, how it is that artists are going to, use them, question them, understand what they are when in fact we don't really understand how they work, is facial classification. So there's an API that, will look at a face and not only identify its gender, which is questionable for an API to begin with, right? But also to, apply or detect from the video the emotion in that face. So here's a surprised looking female, here's a calm looking male. And one of the things that Professor Alexander is really, really interested in is, why it is that certain emotions, how different emotions are ascribed to the genders differently in ways that may be much more about gender bias than they are about any kind of factual, understanding of the actual emotional state of the person. So she's pointing out that there's a lot of gender bias in this, and that's another way that artists and also researchers like Timit Gebru have been, looking at AI, looking specifically at the issue of AI bias, and that's an important part of this. Now, I think already classic art project called What the Robot Saw.
So
And
just,
then-
I'm going to translate really
Yes.
quick. Então, ele está basicamente mostrando o trabalho da professora Amy Alexander e ela fala muito sobre o que significa AI para a arte. Esse vídeo que ele mostrou, esse vídeo que ele está mostrando, na verdade, é um AI que pega esses vídeos pouco populares do YouTube. Ele foi treinado para conseguir editar ao vivo e ele pega vídeos que tem basicamente pessoas falando. Ele procura pessoas falando e rostos. Ele usa um negócio que se chama Google API, que tem bastantes tipos diferentes, e esse Google API classifica faces. E ele estava falando que uma coisa que a Amy também lida bastante é com essa diferença de gênero. Então, como é que o Google API consegue saber que emoção, que gênero, como ele classifica essas faces? E que existe um problema de classificação do por que essa emoção em um homem é lida desse jeito e numa mulher é lida desse jeito. Como ele sabe que é um homem ou uma mulher? Então, tem todas umas questões junto com essa classificação que ela tenta trazer nos trabalhos dela.
And then finally, I want to give you a project to consider. This is a really beautiful project called Fusion, Landscape, and Beyond. Pardon me. And Mingyong Cheng is and her collaborators are the artists that create this project. And what they're doing is looking at they're looking at the history of Chinese landscape painting, and they have trained a generative adversarial neural network with a long history of landscape painting in order to create a. Let me go ahead and play part of this for you. So you get a sense of the music there, but let me make this full screen for you. So what they've done is they've trained a generative adversarial network with a large number of images from the history of Chinese landscape painting. And, this is sort of their model for this. The way of explaining it is, AIs as being capable of expressing something important about cultural memory, or that, AIs in some way, even though we don't understand how they work, can become engaged with cultural memory in a particularized kind of way that is super interesting. And this project led to a lot of really interesting discoveries. If in the history of Chinese landscape painting, text is very important. Poems and characters being included in the painting. And one of the interesting surprises that they had in this project was that, while the AIs that they were using really are able to, produce a very, very interesting kind of graphical memory, cultural memory of this particular style of painting, one of the things that they discovered in there is that it was also interpreting Chinese characters, Chinese ideograms, and also representing those, which in 2020, when they started this project, Mingyong describes as being gibberish Chinese. So any of the Chinese characters that you see appear at various points in this film, the AIs have learned them, but they haven't learned Chinese. In fact, all of those moments of this piece, let me see if I can isolate one somewhere and find anything. There were a few earlier. Like the Chinese that you see appearing in this image is what she describes as gibberish Chinese. Now, we've had a few more years of public conversation about AIs and how they are able to do what they do, which again, my point is we don't know how they do what they do. But interestingly, today we would call this a hallucination of Chinese characters, right? That somehow the AI saw the Chinese characters in the landscape and created a hallucination of what of written Chinese was, because in fact that network was really more looking at kind of focused on looking at the shape of the landscape and learning the painting traditions. And the Chinese Chinese language didn't translate exactly through that, creating this really, really interesting hallucination artifact in this work. Anyway, this is another interesting piece. I'm not
Sorry to interrupt. Just to
I'm not
translate.
going to present it in full depth, but it is a super, super interesting thing, and is also research that's taking place here at UC San Diego.
Just a second. So, ele está explicando que ele está mostrando o trabalho de uma artista, não sei, uma artista chinês, e ele treinou, essa pessoa treinou essa inteligência artificial com pinturas de ambientes tipo rurais ou, enfim, pinturas chinesas clássicas. E essa inteligência artificial ela consegue expressar essa memória cultural dessas pinturas tradicionais, só que dentro dessas pinturas tradicionais um elemento importante é os poemas ou texto. E esse texto em chinês, ele não é visto como uma língua, ele não é visto como chinês, ele é visto como parte da imagem. Então, quando a inteligência artificial reproduz essas imagens, tenta criar imagens novas baseadas no conhecimento que ela tem, ela não consegue entender que tem uma diferença entre o texto e a imagem. Então, o texto que ela cria não faz sentido nenhum. E ele está falando que isso pode ser chamado de uma aberração ou uma alucinação da inteligência artificial, que é essa criação, essa reprodução de um erro ou de um elemento que ela não consegue traduzir. Então, ela vai sendo perpetuada sem sentido.
So I'll conclude, and again, thanking you all very much for having me today. It's really lovely to see you all, and really nice to be here with you virtually. I'll just conclude by saying that we have. Was there an audio issue? Sure that, yeah, my mic's on. So I'll just conclude by saying we don't know how the AI gaze works. We know how to make the AI gaze. We don't know how to explain what it's doing. And artists are working through these questions. And here we have an example of 3 different artists who are dealing with these issues, exploring different aspects of this gaze, the mysteries of AI, if you will. Memo Acton is kind of like, situating it in, spiritual context in order to raise that question about, what is the meaning of this? Really examining, the ontological relationship to these mysteries as well. You have Amy Alexander, who's raising the political issue of AI bias in her artwork in a really interesting way. And yet a third artist or artist collaborative led by Mingyong Cheng that is, trying to explore that in the context of metaphors of cultural memory, and trying to understand how it is that the AI gaze works through cultural memory. And as an artist, this is what artists do who are working in technology is, try to address these unknowns about this emerging technology by really working with AI, being with AI, making with AI, and trying to answer some of these questions that theoretical mathematics cannot answer. Again, it's a triumph of applied mathematics, but we don't know what they do or how they work. So, artists are a really, really interesting place to look toward for an understanding, an emerging understanding through their work of how we're embracing the AI gaze. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to visit with you a little bit this morning, and I thank you for allowing me to share some of my thoughts about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Traduzo? Só vou traduzir a última parte do que ele falou. Ele falou que a gente realmente não sabe como funciona, é um mistério. E ele mostrou esses 3 artistas, um deles lida com esses mistérios ontológicos, com essa coisa mais teológica, mais da essência do ser. E aí você tem a Amy Alexander, que lida com a política de AI, e depois você tem isso do Leon Chang, eu acho que é o nome, a metáfora da memória cultural, de como é que a inteligência artificial vai lidar com a cultura. É isso? Fala alguma coisa?
So now our mediator is going to speak a little bit, Marcos Bastos.
Hi, Brett. Nice
I'm
to
sorry,
see you.
Hi.
Well, first of all, thanks for your lecture. It was very important for us to hear all the aspects you mentioned, both technical questions, questions related to the development of programming in artificial intelligence, and also very short, I was very curious about your archaeology of artists that deal with AI. You just mentioned some names, and I was curious to hear more about it, and also presenting some interesting examples of artists that are exploring the possibilities of artificial intelligence, which was this late part of your talk. So thanks a lot for that. I'll be opening for questions, but before I give the word to the audience, I wanted to ask you a first question about your lecture. Tá legal. Pior é que eu já não lembro mais o que eu falei. They're asking me to translate what I talked, so I'm going to repeat everything in Portuguese now, Brett, okay? Then afterwards I do the question. Bom, pessoal, eu agradeci ao Brett pela palestra, né? E tentei resumir um pouco, né, a fala dele, tanto nos aspectos mais técnicos que ele apresentou, né, questões ligadas ao desenvolvimento da inteligência artificial, como programar, etc. e tal, né, quanto um aspecto que me deixou super curioso na fala, que ele não desenvolveu muito, né, que foi uma espécie de arqueologia dos artistas que trabalham com inteligência artificial, né? Ele lançou uma série de nomes, mas acabou não desenvolvendo tanto isso, né? E especialmente esse momento final em que ele apresentou esses artistas que estão explorando essas 3 possibilidades da inteligência artificial que ele mostrou para a gente aqui, né? E antes de passar para vocês, eu queria fazer uma primeira pergunta para ele, aí depois eu passo para vocês fazerem as questões de vocês também, tá bom? Quanto tempo que tem por falar nisso? Até meio-dia, tá? Ah, então tá tranquilo. So, Brett, I translated these initial remarks that I made here. And now I wanted to ask you a question. You showed a lot of examples of artists that are exploring artificial intelligence. And I think also with some historical cut to it, because it's not just generative AI, but it's other options of AI and previous versions of AI, especially the work of Memo Atkin, I think, the learning to see that it was a previous version of AI. But I think it all culminates in generative AI and the questions that they are posing to contemporary thinking. And I think what is amazing about AI is that it is a language without an object, especially when you think of images. You do not have a concrete object related to that image. It's a textual construction that is creating the image when you describe it in a prompt. And I think this is fascinating because it opens the possibility of human imagination to explore whatever it wants when it's dealing with AI. But I think it's also really dangerous because, as we can see, human imagination has a lot of negative aspects. For example, we have a lot of deep fakes with artificial intelligence, and you mentioned also the question of bias in artificial intelligence, gender bias, but also race bias and others that are present there. So I wanted you to comment a little bit on the ethical challenge that we have in front of us with the usages of artificial intelligence in society, because it seems to me that artists tend to explore the most positive ways of using the technology, the most poetical ways, or even critical views. But when it comes to more disseminated usages, we have a lot of problematic usages, like the deepfakes that I mentioned, for example, and this sort of things. So I wanted you to comment a little bit on the ethical challenge that we have in front of us related to artificial intelligence.
Sure. I mean,
I'll translate the question before
sure.
you answer it. Bom, eu vou traduzir resumindo também, porque eu não lembro tudo que eu comentei aqui. Mas, basicamente, né, eu comentei que ele mostrou, através dos artistas que ele apresentou, uma espécie de histórico da inteligência artificial, né, e que o ponto mais recente da inteligência artificial é a IA generativa, né, que é um tipo de inteligência artificial em que a linguagem não tem objeto, especialmente no caso da imagem, né? Em que você não tem um conteúdo concreto, mas você tem uma descrição por texto que vai resultar nessa imagem, né? E isso abre a possibilidade da inteligência artificial explorar as dimensões mais variadas da imaginação humana, né? Tanto aspectos positivos quanto aspectos negativos, né? Não à toa a gente tem os deepfakes, por exemplo, né? Ou as questões do viés na inteligência artificial, que inclusive ele mencionou no trabalho dele, né? Viés de gênero, mas a gente tem o viés de raça também, né? Então eu pedi para ele falar um pouco a respeito dos desafios éticos que a gente tem no uso da inteligência artificial atualmente, né? Levando em conta o fato de que os artistas tendem a explorar os aspectos mais positivos ou desenvolver visões críticas sobre as formas de uso, né? Mas que o uso mais disseminado das tecnologias, mais recentemente, talvez tenha sido mais problemático, né? A gente tem como se a arte fosse uma utopia e o nosso uso cotidiano mais distópico, né? Então eu pedi para ele falar um pouco a respeito da dimensão ética da inteligência artificial na contemporaneidade. I just translated it, Brett. So if you want to answer
Okay,
it,
great,
feel
great.
free.
Well, first of all, I wanted to say I really admire your granular thinking about this range of issues. And this is a very, of course, important question, very good question. And, I agree with, so much of what you say there in terms of the preface to your question, kind of explicating and setting up the question. So, but the question of ethics is of course, like what the whole world is thinking about, and ethics, extends into economics in very important ways, and ethics extends into legal issues in very, very important ways. And the perspective that I'm in the habit of taking personally, because it's the only one I think that's coherent, is one of technological realism. And technological realism can be encapsulated in the phrase fire warms and fire burns. Fire can do many good things. Fire can be very, very destructive. And if we look at the history of technology in general, we see that there, in different ratios with different technologies, of course, we see that it's not the technology, but it's the cultural, legal, and ethical applications of the technology. So the fundamental ethical problem is in fact not one of AI. The fundamental ethical problem with this moment of AI is in fact more general, which is the problem of technology and capitalism, right? So the question of how does artificial intelligence impact the rights of copyright holders is very, very similar to the kinds of legal questions that rose with the invention of writing, the printing press. The printing press created new problems for who owns the copy, right? Photography, cinema, and we really should be looking at the AI problem holistically. For example, we were to take the ethical issue, narrow it down to legal, narrow it down further to copyright. There's a whole history of previous media technologies that raised similar issues. There's a history of, legally, in terms of legislation and law, codifying the rights that people have relative to the new technologies. And there's also a long history of government being very far behind capitalism in terms of, developing regulatory regimes that explicate what people's rights are. So we haven't even done this with privacy and the internet. And we've been talking about privacy and the internet since the internet, right? Or since the internet became very popularized, particularly in the early 1990s. And we still wrestle with the fundamental ethical issues of privacy and data privacy, right? With Europe doing a much better job than the United States, for example, in terms of creating a legal regime that protects people's privacy. So all of these things, of course, are entangled to some degree or another because AI raises ethical issues around, you know, as you mentioned, racial bias, and how AI is going to be implemented is going to have an impact on all kinds of things, most of which we can't predict yet, right? And we can anticipate if past is prologue that there are going to be problems and that we're going to have to legislate for those problems. And but then at the same time, there's going to be really, really interesting, positive, like things that artists make, but also there will be interesting, positive things that happen with technology that make a general improvement in technology, improve people's lives, create new careers. So, you know, technological realism is the framework that I would wrap around that. And within that technological realism framework, we're going to have to be, you know, in the countries that are still democracies where citizens do have rights, we have to be very, very proactive in, for example, changing copyright law. I'm a strong advocate of changing copyright law such that the people who are represented in the training data sets, right, have a voice in how they are used or not used to train AIs, the kinds of AIs which are going to have social, political, and economic consequences for citizens. This should be a question of citizenship and democracy. And right now, it you know, at least in the United States. I mean, you know, you may have heard of, you know, the legendary political dysfunction in my country. Brazil has some too, I've noticed. Very volatile political kind of environment. And, you know, I wish that, you know, governments around the world were paying more attention to these issues and, you know, dealing with the fact that AI is one of these new technologies that is impacting, having, and will have a personal impact on people's lives, their rights, and their citizenship, and to do the, you know, the highest and best legislation that's possible. For me, that's giving, you know, some copyright protection to training data sets. I think that's got to be one of the number one things that we deal with right now. And then, you know, obviously it's, you know, equally important, I would say, to make sure that AIs are, as we're replacing them as kind of function approximators for judgment in our economy, it's obviously critically important that we make sure that they're not, you know, racist shithooks. That's a technical term. I get to use it. Racist shithooks, and that we protect people's rights to operate within our economies and have their rights fully enforced, and not to let AI interfere with that. These have to be like number one legislative concerns right now, and they're not. We're talking about a lot of bullshit.
Vou traduzir agora o que ele falou, que ele vê a inteligência artificial, essa questão da ética está relacionada muito à economia e direito, e ele segue uma estrutura de pensamento que vem do realismo tecnológico, e que ele até usou uma analogia, comparou a ideia do fogo, que o fogo ele é destrutivo, mas ele também é um poder que você consegue cultivar e fazer várias coisas, várias aplicações produtivas, e que esse problema está relacionado inerentemente com o capitalismo, e o impacto do capitalismo e como o governo está sempre atrás nesse quesito de regulação e de fiscalização da tecnologia e do capital. Então ele usa o caso do copyright, ele especifica o caso do copyright, que é um caso, cada caso relacionado à inteligência artificial envolve questões diferentes e tem que ser analisado de forma diferente. E o caso do copyright de imagem e de treinamento de datasets, que são pessoas que treinam e não têm essa representação, não têm esses direitos protegidos. e que é dos assuntos importantíssimos que devia ser lidado, que é essa ideia da propriedade, do treinamento de dataset, dos direitos das pessoas que treinam e programam essas inteligências artificiais. No entanto, ele traz também um pouco da questão de que ainda não se sabe muito bem como implementar essas questões e que é necessário fiscalizar, até porque ele usa o exemplo das inteligências artificiais como a tendenciosidade das inteligências artificiais. Então, no momento quanto mais presente ela fica na nossa vida, mais necessário é fiscalizar, porque é inadmissível ter uma IA racista ditando questões econômicas de qualquer lugar, assim.
Pessoal, acho que está desligado, ligou. Eu vou abrir para perguntas da plateia, então. Queria saber o que vocês gostariam de perguntar para o Brett, né? E aí acho que vocês podem ficar à vontade para perguntar em português ou em inglês, né? Se for em português... Tá bom, pergunta em português, então.
Bom, eu gostaria de perguntar para ele, principalmente com essa coisa que ele mostrou do colega, acho que do professor M. Alexander, sobre do Google API, que ele fez essa coletânea de edição de vídeo e tal, que ele pegou de vídeo do YouTube. Eu gostaria de saber se, num futuro próximo, é possível a inteligência artificial ter alguma sensibilidade nessa questão quase humana de escolher vídeos, ou é tipo uma coisa bem mais no aleatório, meio que vai tipo, só no algoritmo, que é número.
So Brett, Felipe Akira here is asking if in the near future will AI develop its own sensibility, and he talked about the example of the AI that picked the videos from YouTube, and if the Google API and this AIs pick the videos randomly, or is there already a sensibility in them? Not just the algorithm, but a own sensibility on the AI as it develops.
Well, I think you're speaking of, yeah, I think you're speaking of Amy Alexander's work there, What the Robot Saw. And she has a good, I'd refer you to her website for more information about how it specifically works. One of the key ideas there is that she is selecting for re-editing videos that are not popular, that receive few views. Instead of looking at the most popular part of the algorithmic search that YouTube and other platforms use AI with to identify videos that are of interest to us, she's going through the list and looking at the bottom for the least popular stuff. And that's an aesthetic gesture that's in her work that relates to, things that have to do with, YouTube and popularity and reflecting on those issues. So I'd refer you more to her site for some kind of more specifics about how and why she's doing that, and then layering the context of the AI gaze and AI editing of and computer vision on top of that. But and it's also a way of saying, I don't know that I haven't seen her code. I just have only read her descriptions of what her code does. But in terms of the moment of sentience for AI, I agree with a lot of my colleagues. In particular, one colleague, a super interesting theorist who is also doing AI research here in the Department of Visual Arts in a slightly different area called speculative design in the Department of Visual Arts, who's very, very close to ICAM. They're really kind of two majors, kind of one area having to do with technology and in different forms of technology. But Benjamin Bratton, he wrote this and I think it's a great essay to sort of begin to grasp some of the issues around, the notion of the singularity. And it may not matter. In fact, AI may already have a kind of sentience, and it may not matter that we think of it as in an anthropocentric sense as being like a competitor or an equal to us. Um, One of Benjamin's ideas, and the essay that I'm thinking of is called, trying to remember it off the top of my head, Outing AI. And I can get that, a link to that for you later that you can add to this. But the essential case that he makes in this particular, I think, very important essay is that, instead of thinking of AI as either our competitor or, in his case, he makes a very, very critical, um, you know, um, he does a very, very critical analysis of the way that we're even thinking about AI as a tool or as a worker or indeed as a kind of slave that replaces human work, human labor. He wants to address the kind of, some of the gross ideas that are in the minds of our tech leaders about what the role of AI is. But he ultimately comes to the conclusion that, like, this is a moment, because we don't understand really how these things work, how AIs work, that we treat it as kind of a different species, that we treat it with respect, um, and that it's a moment where, because AI shares some similarities with us, literally modeled on the idea of neurons in our neurology, that the mathematics of, and that we don't understand the mathematics of AI. We also don't understand the, how our neurons actually work in a wet computer, if you will, is that we should show them some respect and think of them, think of this new thing as a way that humanity can learn more about itself, right? That, by being with AI, we can, learn something important about who we are. And I think that's a much more kind of, interesting and less, anthrocentric way of thinking about these things. In fact, they do share some of our, you know, neural capacities, yet they're also very, very different from us. Um, I would make another argument here. Although, as a scholar and a human, the philosopher John Searle is a little bit of a, well, as a human, he's a little bit of a gross guy, right? I just want to admit that up front. Philosopher John Searle, who spent most of his career at UC Berkeley, has done some of the most important kind of thinking about artificial intelligence. Um, and he also had some, like, personal peccadillos with his graduate students, which were pretty gross. So I just want to acknowledge that up front. But I still think the research is kind of important. And the key idea that comes from John Searle's philosophy of artificial intelligence is the notion of intentionality, right? So we've been we've been using a metaphor largely in our culture of, like, Skynet, the singularity, the moment that the AI surpasses us and becomes our master or something like that. Um, that's very weird thinking, actually. But thinking about AI in the context of just intentionality, I think, is very clarifying. And it's basically the idea that, the thing that's still different about us and these, you know, neural networks with a certain number of parameters, right, that we looked at earlier, that we got an introduction to, is and this is very much what I really do believe about it, is the AIs that we're creating today do not have intentionality yet. They don't want anything, right? They don't want to eat. If you unplug them, they don't care. They don't know yet, like, what they are, right? If you unplug the, if the power goes off at the center, the AI doesn't know it's dying. The AI can be restarted. They're different than us, right? And they don't want to, they don't decide one day that they're going to take up knitting as a hobby. They don't want to fuck. They don't want anything. They just approximate a function right now, right? Um, Even if they produce this kind of spooky linguistic behavior in which we see ourselves, the thing on the other side of the screen still doesn't want to do anything. Um, and until it has, like, until it, I'm not even going to think about the singularity or the or that moment until we create AIs that have intention. And even with Chat GPT-4, we looked at a model that has merely, you know, depending on how you think about it, like 8 neurons, so maybe or 16 neurons, so in the you know the range of 2 to the 16th power, um, or approximately that many. Well, not even 2 to the 16th power, a much smaller number of parameters than that, in the order of many thousands of parameters. Whereas ChatGPT-4 now has a trillion parameters, right? To approximate pi, thousands of parameters, ChatGPT-4 trillions of parameters. But it still doesn't, even ChatGPT-4, I'm going to argue, does not have intentionality yet. So I'm not even going to think about that until there's any evidence that the AI wakes up some morning and wants to take up sailing as a hobby. Then I'm going to think about that more.
Ele falou que a inteligência artificial já dá para notar algum gesto estético na seleção, até porque, apesar de seguir um critério, existe um gesto estético na edição, na separação. No entanto, ele traz um colega dele que chama Benjamin Brown, com um texto chamado Outing AI, que ele vai mandar para a gente, que discorda dessa visão e contesta essa visão de ver a inteligência artificial como essa concorrência artística, essa concorrência. E que a gente tem essa visão da inteligência artificial que vai ser a trabalhadora, que vai vai competir com a gente, quando isso é só uma perspectiva sobre o tema. Existem outras visões e outras possibilidades. E a IA, apesar de ter algumas coisas semelhantes, também tem coisas completamente diferentes na forma que ela pensa, e isso pode acabar ensinando algo para nós, sobre nós mesmos, e tem esse potencial. E em seguida ele traz um filósofo que discutiu muito os computadores, as inteligências artificiais, que é o John Searle, e traz que discute a questão da intencionalidade, que até então as inteligências artificiais não têm intenção no sentido de desejos, de vontades, não tem o medo de ser desligada, vontade de reproduzir, de comer, essas vontades. Elas estão lá aproximando funções, como ele fala. Até agora, ela só aproxima funções, ela faz aquele trabalho matemático que ele mostrou antes, e que ele, enquanto não tiver um indício desse desenvolvimento da ciência nas inteligências artificiais, ele não está pensando nisso agora.
A gente tem duas perguntas do YouTube, uma do Pedro Henrique, que é quais as profissões que o Brad acha que vai ser mais afetadas pela IA, e do Adriano Souza, quanto código um artista precisa conhecer para realizar trabalhos como os de Acten e Alexander.
So we have two questions that were sent to us through YouTube. Pedro Henrique has asked, what are the professions you think that will be most affected by the AI?
Yeah, professions. I've never been good at that answer. The way that I think about this is, like, all professions are going to be impacted by AI, but what matters for a profession still is very, very, is the expertise in the profession, right? So continue to pursue being an expert in something, and then also become familiar with data science and how AIs are prepared and programmed. I mean, in other words, be a doctor of, biology, or be a doctor of computers, or of any other kind of specific field. Let's say accounting, right? Know those fields very well, be experts in those fields, but then also have data fluency and the ability to think about how AIs might digest that data to do decision making and knowledge discovery relative to your expertise, whatever that is. And I'm not going to say things like, what particular fields that anybody can choose, because I think anybody who's ever asked or answered that question has to some degree been right and some degree been wrong. Personally, I just say, you have a better chance at a long career if you really love the field and you really care about the field that you're studying, and that you're passionate about that field, that you have a better chance of staying in that field for a long time. But regardless of what the field is, be able to relate your expertise to AI, understand the basics of AI, understand what training a neural network is and how that works. And then you'll be able to deploy some of the tools that come out of AI in a much much more informed way than an expert who doesn't have the AI experience would be able to. That's my thought about it.
Ele respondeu que ele não saberia dizer quais profissões vão ser mais afetadas, porque ele acha que todas vão ser afetadas. E a opinião dele sobre como lidar com isso é buscar expertise e conhecimento na área que você tem interesse, se importa e se vai se dedicar. E também ter um conhecimento sobre essas novas tecnologias, porque isso auxilia você a entender, a se adaptar e a saber como lidar com isso no seu campo, porque vai afetar meio que, segundo todos os campos, até porque ele falou que qualquer pessoa que vai falar, que vai fazer uma previsão, vai acabar acertando em alguns pontos e errando em outros. Então, ele prefere argumentar que o importante é você buscar expertise na sua área e saber também um pouco sobre essas novas tecnologias que estão surgindo para saber como lidar com elas. The other question is, how much would one need to know about coding and AI to produce arts like the one from Amy Alexander?
Amy Alexander is one of the best programmers in the world. You're never going to know as much as Amy Alexander, right? You come to UCSD to study with Amy Alexander because of how much Amy Alexander knows. So don't even go there. But in terms of like being able to work with and experiment with AI, I think there's some very, very fundamental things in data science. In fact, I think you could, my feeling is, and again, I've learned it all slowly over a longer period of time in my life, and it's not what I do. I'm not totally an expert, but I would say learn Python, take some data science classes, and I'm gonna point something out that in traditional computer programming, the important things to know for what we would now maybe call classical computer programming at this moment are, there's a lot of minutia, but really fundamentally it's 3 control structures, data structures, and algorithms that operate over those data structures, and kind of the importance of the model of object-oriented programming. And you can, and some other things like how to read data from a file and write data to a file. So that stuff, a lot of that stuff is increasingly being simplified for particular applications in data science. So you can get started in data science now without a computer science degree. There are data science programs popping up all over that address the needs of researchers in different fields. And I would say maybe, it might just be 5 classes and, less than a year of study, and you'll be training neural networks. And there's the really interesting thing is we know how to train them, but there's still a lot of like guesswork and experimentation and testing that are involved we saw it a little bit in the teaching example. It's that I presented earlier, which is just a common teaching example that's in many different books, in fact. That you start out with they started out with 8 neurons, and it didn't work, and then expanding it to 16 neurons, then it did match the sine wave function. And so a lot of it is still just sort of experience, sort of the art of experimentation, and the only way that you'll learn how to do that is by doing it. So I'd say like computer science 1, introduction to computer programming, and then getting like at a very low level, data structures and algorithms, which is usually the second computer science course, and then a few classes in data science, and you're doing this. I think we're at the point where for people who are in college, we may be 4 or 5 classes that you could take, and then you're doing this actually at a very high level. So anyway, that's something to think about. Obviously in computer science, it's a huge area of research, but a lot of the research is how are we going to make this accessible to a psychologist who collects data, or a quantitative social scientist, or a marine biologist whose expertise is somewhere else.
Ele respondeu que, assim, a Amy Alexander é tipo uma expert do campo, então é praticamente impossível, assim, mas que um bom começo é aprender o Python, fazer umas aulas de ciência de dados e começar aprendendo sobre essas estruturas de controle, algoritmo e programação, lendo e escrevendo dados. E também um fator importante é que, como ainda não se sabe direito como elas funcionam, como as inteligências artificiais produzem o que elas produzem, é ir experimentando e descobrindo meio que por conta própria assim, a programação, errando, acertando. Até porque hoje em dia tem uma grande parte da ciência de dados que está tentando tornar isso mais acessível para outros campos e acessibilizar para psicólogos. Ele até falou biologia marinha. E é isso, é começar por essas aulas de ciência de dados e Python.
Hi, Brett. This is me, Jani. How are you? And
My dear friend,
you know,
my dear
man.
friend. Always so good to see you.
Very nice to see you.
I want to come see you guys sometime soon.
Yes,
very high.
we are gonna see each other.
Please tell Jacques I said happy birthday, please.
Okay, I tell him. Thank you. And Brett, you know that we are running late, and thank you very much for your amazing talk today. And you know, it's very interesting to see how you are always trying to go inside the black box, and how hard it's been, you know, being inside the black box, you know, because it's very sophisticated systems that we are dealing with nowadays, and then it's been very difficult to understand, you know, how the machines are working and how they work now. And for me, I don't know what to say about the artificial intelligence, because so far I have a very good relationship with them. I don't have, you know, this bad feeling about the artificial intelligence, and we can have this conversation another day, because it's going to be a very long conversation about this subject. And I want to make you an invitation. If you decide to come to São Paulo for the file, you remember, I remember that you were planning to come to São Paulo.
I was hoping to, but
yeah, and if you stay here for
life is going to intrude, unfortunately.
Yeah, if you stay here for 1 or 2 weeks in August, if you should come to visit us at PUC, and maybe we can, you know, we can have a workshop together, and we can talk about AI and to make some experiments here.
Maybe August, maybe.
Yeah.
July's really bad, but August, maybe.
Great.
I'll think about it. I just so much. I want to come. I really want to come. I haven't left the United States since before COVID. So thank you. Definitely, we'll think about this together.
Great.
And I think you make a very good point about the black box. I think you said it better. Bringing up the black box, you bring up the issue better than I do, because the classical idea of the black box is that we didn't have to know. The person using the black box doesn't have to know how it works, but there's always somebody who understands how it works. That's the concept of the black box, includes information hiding. And many people get confused about this. Information hiding just means that you don't have to know how it works to use it, but there's still somebody who knows what's inside the black box. Until now. Now it's different. Now we don't know how, when we use AI as a black box, it's a true, legitimate, we don't know how it works black box. Nobody can tell you how it works. We can make them. We don't know what they do. We don't know how they work, right? And so there's a new black box. So thank you for bringing that up. There's a true box, and the AI is a true black box.
Yeah. And I want to, do you want to translate?
Traduz?
Yeah, translation. They're going to translate.
Traduz a sua fala também, né?
Eu falei com ele que a gente está terminando, né, aqui agora, que na realidade eu tenho uma ótima relação com a inteligência artificial, então eu não sei muito bem o que dizer sobre isso, e acho que a fala dele foi super legal, porque ela mostra quão complicado tem sido trabalhar com essas novas máquinas dentro desse conceito da caixa preta, que a gente tanto fala, né, para as tecnologias. E aí, como essa caixa preta é muito mais sofisticada do que ela era antigamente. E eu também convidei ele para, se ele tinha intenção de vir até a PUC, de vir ao Brasil agora para participar do FAIO, para ver o FAIO, e convidei ele então para ficar aqui mais 2 semanas, se ele puder ficar, em agosto, e aí fazer um workshop aqui na PUC, eu tenho uma conversa conosco aqui. Ele não é a primeira vez que ele veria a PUC, porque ele já veio, já fez aqui workshops com a gente. E aí seria ótimo se ele pudesse vir. Foi isso.
Daí ele falou que essa ideia da caixa preta com a inteligência artificial é diferente do que era antigamente, que o problema não era você não saber como funciona, era ter alguém que saiba como funciona. Você só precisa saber usar. Só que com a inteligência artificial essa se tornou uma verdadeira caixa preta, porque a gente não sabe ainda como funciona aquilo direito. E isso é uma questão que está sendo investigada no momento, assim.
Isso aí. Mais alguma? One more question? Okay.
Tem mais alguma questão, gente? Acho que a gente pode encerrar, então. Está desligado esse microfone, agora está ligado. Bom, então a gente encerra aqui, né? Eu queria agradecer muito a presença de todos, especialmente os que perguntaram, né? E Brett, thanks a lot. It was an amazing talk, as Jenny said. Hope to see you soon in Brazil.
So lovely to spend the morning with you. Thank you very much.
So we are finishing our lecture here now. Thank you so much. It was an amazing conversation and really we learned a lot. So I hope we have other opportunities to do another seminar, something similar in the future. And thank you.